So we've got the National Assembly, which is the conflation of what had previously been the three estates. There is now the National Assembly is the embodiment of the will and the sovereignty of the people. The Bastille has fallen. The first émigrés have fled. And Louis, who has not fled, is trying to reinvent himself as a constitutional monarch. But while all this is going on, everything that precipitated the revolution, so chiefly the fact that there's no money and that the bread price is very high, that hasn't really changed.
Yeah, so there's still an atmosphere of panic and crisis, isn't there? So here's the thing. Why are the deputies who are in the National Assembly, why would they spend all their time talking about a declaration of human rights when you would think their priority would be to be discussing bread supplies or whatever it might be?
Because I think that most of the deputies who had assembled at Versailles in May 1789, so for the Estates General that then becomes the National Assembly, I mean, they thought that they had come there to give France a new constitution. And I think they operate on the assumption that you can't remedy the ills facing France unless you have set the country on new foundations. And the Declaration of Rights is an attempt to frame for both the delegates themselves, but also for all the people of France, an understanding of what henceforward will be animating the new France.
Right.
And I think that is actually an understanding that is turbocharged by the fall of the Bastille. Because you were saying how the people in the National Assembly are actually perturbed by what happens.
Yeah.
They're unsettled by it.
And actually, I'm right in saying, aren't I, that as the weeks go by, so during the time they're thinking about this, the news coming in, not so much from Paris, but from the countryside, is more alarming than ever, and arguably more alarming than ever before in French history, because this is the year of what historians call the Great Fear, la grande peur, the Great Fear.
The Great Fear.
So this is coming in from the provinces.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's hope as well as fear. So we've already mentioned him, Arthur Young, this Englishman who gone on a trip across France,
an ill-timed holiday,
an ill-timed trip. So he 2 days before the fall of the Bastille, he is in Lorraine and he meets a peasant woman. He asks her, how are you doing? And he writes what she said. It was said at present that something was to be done by some great folks for such poor ones, but she did not know who nor how. But God send us better, because property taxes and feudal dues are crushing us. And Arthur Young, as a kind of illustration of the way that the poor are being crushed by the weight on them, he assumes that this woman must be kind of 60 or 70, but he asks, and she turns out to be 28. So, yeah.
Oh, no. That's how French people look, though, Tom. What can you do? But then the Bastille falls, and that actually... That turns up it doesn't lessen the temperature in the countryside. It actually, it sends it through the roof, because people now start... they hear that one fortress has fallen, and they start to attack other citadels of authority, don't they? And they're burning the registers, and they're smashing their way into chateaux.
I think the fall of the Bastille is reported as the fall of feudalism. And we again mentioned this in the previous episode. It's very peasants' revolt. There's this idea that if you as a peasant can burn the registers and the charters that condemn you to work as a peasant, then you will be free. And so they start targeting chateaux, and particularly abbeys and monasteries, which also, as in the days of the peasant revolt, own large tracts of land, and this brings kind of feudal dues and tithes with them. So an example of an abbey that gets attacked is one in Burgundy called Senezon, and this is completely leveled, and it belongs to a very distinguished local family, the family of Talleyrand-Périgord. And the best known member of this family is actually a bishop, the bishop of the local town of Autun. And he had basically become a bishop because his nurse had not been looking after him and drops him on the floor, and it damages his foot when he's about 3, and the foot never heals. And so he grows up unable to fulfill the military destiny that otherwise would have been his as a kind of swaggering aristocrat. And so he has no choice but to go into the church, which is an absolute mismatch between his talents, because he's quite Marquis de Sade. I mean, he's not that bad, but he's a kind of cynic. He's a free thinker. He's definitely inclined to libertinism, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
But he is unbelievably able, shrewd, kind of cunning operator, kind of almost the embodiment of the Machiavel, isn't he? He's
he's the great survivor.
The great survivor. So he gets elected as a member of the First Estate, so that's the church, to go to Versailles. And he, when he's there, rather than kind of bat for the church, he teams up with Mirabeau, who's the great spokesman for the Third Estate, and they are sat together, kind of working out drafts for the Declaration of the Rights of Man as news from the provinces is coming in. And the news is very, very alarming if you have any commitment to the integrity of the nation. So the whole country seems to be disintegrating. And we talked about the importance of rumor and the anxiety of conspiracy in the context of the Bastille. This is exactly what's happening in the countryside as well. And there are kind of terrified stories that the aristocrats are deliberately setting out to starve or poison the poor. And if that sounds mad, again, this is a staple of plots in the Marquis de Sade's novels. This idea that aristocrats have nothing better to do than to kind of plot starvation and ruin for the entire country is clearly part of the kind of the climate of paranoia of the time.
And even at this stage, there's a sort of I don't know whether xenophobia is too strong a word, but there's a great fear of foreigners, isn't there? That there are foreign armies that are poised to attack at any moment. That there are foreign-sponsored bands of brigands. People attack foreigners. They attack Jews. They're looking for scapegoats, and this sort of mad paranoia that there's somebody out there, maybe just over the hill, who's going to attack your town, burn your crops, steal all your food, all of that kind of stuff.
And so the process of people then forming militias to guard against this fear, this will then get reported by a neighbouring community who will then see this militia as precisely what they've got to guard against. And so it has a kind of knock-on effect that people are raising militias against the phantoms of militias. And so it goes on. And this is absolutely not what people want. You know, people are not demanding a kind of the disintegration of the country. Actually, they want greater control. They want people who can sort this out and give them bread and give them security. And back in Versailles, the delegates are themselves stressed that they're unable to provide this, and they get caught up in the mood of panic themselves. And so the more radical among the deputies think, you know, we need to do something dramatic here that will reassure people that we're on their side. So one of them calls it a kind of magic. And this kind of magic happens on the evening of the 4th of August, 1789. And it's a time when the National Assembly is actually very thinly attended. It's the evening. And a guy stands up who you mentioned, Dominic, in the previous episode, the Vicomte de Neuilly, the guy who comes in and reports the fall of the Bastille to the king. And he's a man who has a foot in both the kind of the royal and the revolutionary camps. So his mother is Madame Etiquette, who is the guide to Marie Antoinette, who is always kind of scolding her for breaking the etiquette and so on.
Yeah. So they uphold the embodiment of the rules and regulations of the court.
Exactly. But he has served alongside Lafayette, who is his brother-in-law, in the American Revolution. And when Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown, he had been the official representative of France.
I hate him already.
Right. Well, so he's interestingly positioned. And so he stands up and he says that the Kingdom of France is floating between the complete destruction of society and a government which would be admired and followed throughout Europe. So in other words, we have to do something radical or it will be complete anarchy. And so the radical step he proposes is that all feudal obligations should be abolished, which of course essentially means that from that point on, people will not need to go around ransacking chateaus and abbeys.
Yeah.
And the other thing, which he proposes in a very kind of offhand manner, is that everyone in the kingdom should pay taxes. And this is precisely the issue that had been inspiring people in the previous year to refuse to accept the king's kind of fiscal solution.
This is the maddest thing, isn't it? This is the maddest aspect of this whole story. This sense of, people talk about, one delegate I see describes it as a moment of patriotic drunkenness. People are throwing their distinctions on the bonfire and saying, yeah, let's all pay tax. And the madness is this whole situation would not have come about
Yeah, if they
if
done
they
that
had just agreed to pay
previous
tax
year.
as the king wanted a year or two earlier. I mean, it is the extent to which they have swung, and they're now seized with this almost hysterical, almost paranoid passion. I mean, it really is one of the great political turnarounds.
Yeah, so Sharma calls it a cult of self-dispossession. And I mean, I think it is something that would be very recognizable today. It's people checking their privilege,
Yeah.
standing up and saying, I have too much privilege, I must get rid of it all.
Yeah.
But there's also, I mean, there's kind of tit for tat quality between the representatives of the church and the aristocracy. So a bishop stand up and proposes the abolition of all hunting rights. So essentially from this point on, anyone can just go and shoot anything that they want. And so a duke then stands up and says, yeah, fine, but we'll get rid of church tithes. And by the end of it, I think it's not just feudalism that's been jettisoned, but the very notion of privilege itself. And so William Doyle in the Oxford History of the French Revolution, he says it proved to be the most sweeping and radical legislative session of the whole French Revolution. And it was all just the event of an evening, a night. People standing up and saying, let's get rid of everything.
That all that fuss about the defense of privilege and privilege being part of liberty. Yeah. And now in one evening, they've thrown them all away. Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing. And then, of course, 3 weeks later comes the Declaration, which is the second kind of monumental moment in this process of legislation. And you said last time that actually the guy who originally proposes it is your mate Lafayette,
an empty-headed political dwarf, as the dictionary of the French Revolution calls him,
a dashing representative of Franco-American friendship. And obviously he's been in America. He's very close to George Washington, has close relations with Thomas Jefferson, who is the American ambassador in Paris at this point. And so he basically proposes that it be on the American model. And he think, just as the American Declaration had joined the various states in America together, he thinks that it will help unify a sundering nation in France. And it proclaims 17 rights. And the first of these, men are born and remain free and equal in rights. Social distinctions may be based only on considerations of the common good. So that is égalité. That's the expression of all the feudal privileges that have been jettisoned.
Yeah.
And this in turn then defines what the purpose of good governance should be. The aim of every political association is the preservation of the natural and imprescriptible rights of man. These rights are liberty, property, safety, and resistance to oppression, with an emphasis there, I think, on the first word, liberté.
Yes.
So that's the second article. And I think it's very obvious what the target of that article is. And the third article makes it clear. The principle of any sovereignty lies primarily in the nation. No corporate body, no individual may exercise any authority that does not expressly emanate from it. So the corporate body is clearly the church and the individual is clearly the king, although neither are actually mentioned.
And no supernatural authority there either. So
no supernatural
God,
authority.
Right?
Yeah.
But interestingly, the nation, so a new abstract noun, no one questions what the nation might be or says, well, actually, that's quite hard to define. Who belongs to the nation? What does the nation even mean?
Well, the nation is a community joined in the bonds of fraternity.
Yeah.
So we have égalité, liberté, fraternity. They've all been kind of name checked. And then, so that's the kind of the more abstract end of the list. But what you then have is a whole list of articles that are clearly very, very prescriptively trying to knock away the various props of the Ancien Régime. So Article 9, every man is presumed innocent until he's been declared guilty. That's targeting the lettre de cachet, the way in which the king could just have people arrested and put in prison. Article 10, no one may be disturbed on account of his opinions, even religious ones, as long as the manifestation of such opinions does not interfere with the established law and order. So that's targeting the privileged position held by the Catholic Church. This is in law. So ever since 1715, the Protestants had been named illegal. Catholicism had been the only legally permissible faith. And so it's unsurprising that actually even the clerics who have cheerfully jettison their privileges are very, very upset about this. And it's their opposition that delays the final agreement on this document for about a week.
Okay.
And then Article 11, the free communication of ideas and of opinions is one of the most precious rights of man. So no more censorship, whether that's coming from the king or from the church.
So, Tom, the question is, I mean, some of these things, you as an Anglo-Saxon, you could say, we have quite a lot of this in Britain or in the new United States of America. So to what extent do you think this is genuinely, I mean, I can see how if you're a Frenchman, you think this is groundbreaking and a transformative moment in world history. But of course, I mean, there's sort of, to go back to the Margaret Thatcher argument, could you say, well, come on, a lot of this exists already. What's so special and what's so groundbreaking about all this?
So I think it is an absolutely decisive moment in world history. And it's decisive because it is an overt rupture with so much that had gone before. And it's a rupture that's happening in the preeminent, intellectual capital of Europe. Mm-hmm. But I think it's also significant as a reiteration of things that had gone before. So I don't think that the rupture is quite as complete as people say. So it's very self-consciously a new beginning. That's what this is the great kind of manifesting principle that governs the whole declaration. But of course, as you pointed out, the revolutionaries aren't the first to attempt such a thing. And it's kind of implicit in the declaration because, it's saying that the rights it proclaims are natural, unalienable, and sacred. Then it's mad to think that they can't have been proclaimed before. Or are the French saying,
yeah, it never occurred.
They're the first people to discover them?
To have noticed them, yeah.
And then there's the further issue of, is this a document that is targeted at France at a particular moment in its history? Or are the pretensions it has to be universal, are they authentic?
Well, that's the la nation. If you're talking about the nation, that raises that as a problem, doesn't it? Because this is an argument that goes to the core of the French Revolution. Is it universalist? Or is it, well, it obviously is universalist, but it is also the crucible of nationalism.
It is.
And it's France that invents modern nationalism.
Yeah. And so there's a massive tension there, which I think will run throughout the revolution and indeed throughout 19th and 20th century history as well. But what it does very effectively is to provide a kind of legal imprimatur for the destruction of the Ancien Regime. So it's the intellectual parallel to the demolition of the stones of the Bastille. So just as the walls of the Bastille are being demolished, the appearance of these words and articles on a piece of paper that then gets passed is doing something similar. It is eradicating, supposedly, the taint of absolutism. So this idea that sovereignty now lies with the nation and not the king, this is a massive, massive step. Yeah. And the implications for what had previously been the two estates, the nobility and the church, are obviously also seismic. So the logical implication is that the nobility should no longer exist. If they have no privileges, then what's the point of them? And basically within less than a year, so on the 19th of June 1790, all hereditary titles are abolished, and all the kind of traditional symbols of nobility, so coats of arms, the kind of the liveries that are worn by servants, people with their own pews in church, all that kind of thing. Yeah. They all go. Yeah. But it's the church, I think, that actually loses even more because that most of the aristocracy have so much land, and of course, property has been guaranteed under the Declaration of the Rights of Man, so they keep their lands. Yeah. For the church, it's a much more crippling fact that tithes have been abolished. So tithes, so the money that is raised to keep the church going, that's gone. So when that happens, all particularly the poor parish clergy have completely lost their source of income. Yeah, and the Catholic Church has also been forced to concede complete and total freedom of worship and thought. And I think that in a way, this is the most, in the context of France, this is the most revolutionary development of all, because the church in France is an even older institution than the monarchy. Its privileges have been writ very, very large over the course of French history. I mean, going back to the very founding of the monarchy. So I think
Yeah.
two scenes from the reign of Louis the 16th kind of illustrate the way in which even the monarchy stands in the shadow of the antiquity of the church. So Louis's coronation in June 1775, massively retro, even though actually Louis does make sure that Marie Antoinette has her own purpose-built toilet, which was very nice.
Nice of him. Yeah.
So it's held in Reims, where this is the traditional place for kings to be crowned. This is the key episode in the life of Joan of Arc, where she gets to crown the Dauphin there. Yeah. But the reason why Reims is the place that you go is that in 496, the first Frankish king to convert to Christianity had been crowned there, and he had supposedly been anointed with oil from a kind of a flask, a casket that had been brought down by a white dove. And Louis, standing there, being anointed, being crowned, had this is his oath: "I swear to devote myself sincerely and with all my power to annihilating heretics condemned by the church in all lands under my rule." So there you have everything that the enlightened despise about the French church, kind of doves coming down with oil and sectarian hostility to Protestants.
But an oath that Louis would undoubtedly have taken enormously seriously. And as we'll see, the fact that he is now contravening that oath and what he sees as his loyalty to the church more generally, that is going to have a massive psychological impact on him.
It will. And then Dominic, bookending that at the beginning of his reign, the episode that you described in the previous episode where he comes to Paris after the fall of the Bastille, and he goes to the Hotel de Ville and he is given the cockade, and the cockade by Lafayette, and this will form the colours of the tricolour. So white for the colour of the monarchy, and blue and red for the city of Paris. And why red and blue?
That's a good question.
These are the colours of the two saints, the two of the patron saints of Paris. So the blue is for Saint Martin of Tours, a man of very humble stock who in the 4th century had risen to become the Bishop of Tours. And he is famous, of course, for giving half his cloak to a beggar who had no clothes, who you might describe as a sans culotte, a man too poor to buy his own clothes. And Saint Martin gives him the cloak to cover him. And the red is for Saint Denis. And Saint Denis had supposedly been beheaded in the 3rd century on a great hill overlooking Paris that had then been given the name of Montmartre, the mountain of the martyr. And from Montmartre, Saint Denis was supposed to have carried his head, preaching a sermon as he went. He then reaches a spot to the north of Paris where he finally dies, and a great basilica dedicated to Saint Denis is raised over it. And this is the French Westminster Abbey. This is where all the kings and queens of France are buried. And it kind of beautifully exemplifies the historical ironies and tensions of the fact that this cockade that Louis is wearing in his hat, it's a symbol of a new order. It's the union of a patriot king, a constitutional king with his people. But it also, without most people even thinking about it, has these echoes of a fabulously ancient past. And it focuses, I think, the big question: is it possible actually to have a new beginning that doesn't bear these trace elements of the past?
Right. Can you have year zero?
Can you authentically have a year zero? Or are you inevitably, in doing that, going to bear the kind of the marks of the contamination of the past, reaching back, not just decades, but centuries and even millennia? And that you can ask the same question about the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. Is it a repudiation of the Catholic heritage, the Christian heritage? Or, Dominic, is it something more complex? Is it a reworking of it?
So when people ask, is it a bit more complex? They never say no, it's actually much simpler. Have you noticed that? They never do that, Tom. I've never
because it never is it? It never
500
is.
Episodes. So Jonathan Israel argues that there were different. The Enlightenment is this process it's driven by human reason and scientific inquiry and all of that kind of thing, the skepticism, and that it has different phases. And there's something that he calls the radical Enlightenment. And what exactly how does he distinguish the radical Enlightenment?
So the radical Enlightenment is overtly hostile to religion. often overtly hostile to monarchy. So, and because the French Revolution will end up bringing down both, it's understandable why people should look to the kind of the underground writings of the Enlightenment for inspiration. And you know, there are indisputably figures who do bear the markers of that, and probably the most famous of them is an aristocrat, inevitably, called the Marquis de Condorcet, who is he's a philosophe, he's a mathematician, he's an economist, and he a bit like Lavoisier, who we talked about in the previous episode, he's a great enthusiast for cleaning up rivers. So he kind of it's a kind of Fergal Sharkey-esque quality to
our overseas listeners won't know who that is, Tom.
Okay, right. But so Fergal Sharkey is a campaigner against pollution in Britain's rivers, and he and the Marquis de Condorcet would have gone on tremendously well. And his hostility to sewage in rivers is reflective of his hostility to the sewage of superstition and barbarism in public discourse, Dominic.
No one likes the sewage of barbarism, do they?
No. Well, I don't know. I've got a slight soft spot for it, I'll be honest. And so, unsurprisingly, when the revolution kicks off, the Marquis de Condorcet is a huge enthusiast for it. And he casts it absolutely, as it so often is to this day, as being the triumph of progress over superstition. And he's very, very into the idea that what you have to do is dig down deep, muster empirical data, don't rely on kind of mad stories about doves bringing down holy oil or anything like that. That's not going to help in the battle with ignorance and poverty. Christianity is nonsense. It's objective reason that will provide the inspiration for people in the war against all the faults that the Ancien Régime had embodied. And he sees the duty of the revolution to scour France and indeed more broadly the world free of the taint of specifically Christianity, which he detests. So he says that the Christian millennium is an impressive demonstration of what energetic reactionaries can do to spread superstition, demote the intellect, prolong stagnation, secure tyranny, degrade man as a reasonable being, and thus hold back the march of mind for centuries.
Oh, okay.
And in saying that, he is echoing the kind of underground Enlightenment philosophers, but he is also echoing the most famous of all the French philosophes of the 18th century, who we've already mentioned, who is Voltaire, the great wit who had cast the Bastille as this terrible dungeon. He'd written up about the man in the iron mask, and is very, very, I mean, he's probably the most famous writer in 18th century Europe. He's dead by the time the revolution breaks out, but is a massive, massive influence on the way that Europe, and France particularly, has come to see the past. And Voltaire's great clarion cry is "Écrasez l'infâme," destroy the infamous thing, the thing of infamy, by which he doesn't just mean the Catholic Church, although the Catholic Church is the particular object of his hatred. He basically means Christianity. And so he was explicit about this. Every sensible man, every honorable man must hold the Christian sect in horror. And, he is a brilliant, brilliant writer, but he's also a brilliant activist. And again, he fixes on examples of tyranny and oppression that he knows will resonate with the French people. So his story about the man in the iron mask is one of those, but there's an even more vivid example because it happens in his own lifetime. So he's picking up on a live injustice. And this happened in 1762. And it was a Protestant, a Huguenot from Toulouse in the south of France called Jean Calin, who had been accused of murdering his own son. And he had been convicted under very dubious circumstances.
Yeah, he obviously didn't kill him.
Yeah, obviously. Well, so it turns out.
Yeah.
And he's broken very horribly on the wheel. And Voltaire picks up on this. And he says this wasn't, he was broken on the wheel, not because people really thought that he killed his son, but because he was a Protestant. It's an example of, religious intolerance at its brutal worst. He casts Calin as a victim of sectarian persecution. And his campaign has such an impact that in 1764, so only 2 years after he had died, Louis the 15th, the predecessor of Louis the 16th, had actually received Calin's family at Versailles, and the following year had issued a posthumous exoneration, a pardon. This is typical of Voltaire's campaigning, and it makes him someone that people not just in the kind of the radical wing of French opinion, but across the whole span of French society comes to admire very much. So in 1778, Talleyrand, the Bishop of Autun, had actually gone and visited Voltaire. So Voltaire had been allowed to come. He'd been in exile in Geneva. He'd come to Paris, and Talleyrand had gone to visit Voltaire there. And Voltaire by this point is incredibly old. And he has this brilliant description of Voltaire. Every line of that remarkable countenance is engraved in my memory. I see it now before me, the small fiery eyes staring from shrunken sockets, not unlike those of a chameleon.
Yeah.
It's widely held by enthusiasts for the revolution that the revolution is, that he is the father of it. The glorious revolution has been the fruit of his works, one of them says. And in fact, in 1791, so 2 years after the fall of the Bastille, Voltaire's remains are dug up and reinterred in what is an almost completed church, but has been reconsecrated as a temple to liberty, the Pantheon, the pantheon, the temple to all the gods. And Voltaire is buried there amidst kind of great splendor as one of the kind of the presiding inspirations for the revolution.
But obviously, so you can see why all this stuff, the Declaration of the Rights of Man, the legacy of Voltaire, you can see why all this would appeal to the Marquis de Condorcet, or somebody who sees himself as an enlightened freethinker, genuinely a kind of metropolitan intellectual. But obviously, most of France is not populated by people like that. It's a very rural country where, vast millions upon millions of people work the land. They're used to the old ways, the old parish church, the local curé, the rituals of the Catholic year, all of that kind of stuff. And they are not reading Voltaire.
They're not.
So what on earth did they make of this move from August 1789 onwards, the kind of anti-Christian side of the revolution?
I think lots of them come to be enthused by the spirit of the revolution. I think they come to accept the revolution on its own terms, but equally lots of them are appalled. And the more devout among Catholics come to see the whole revolution basically as a massive Protestant plot. And one of the reasons for that is that Protestants are actually, they have quite leading roles in the revolution. So they're, the moment that they're allowed to kind of practice their religion freely, they're busy building churches. They're often quite wealthy, so they have the money to hand.
Yeah.
They're busy joining revolutionary committees in Paris and across the whole of France. And in March 1790, a Protestant pastor is actually elected president of the National Assembly. So Catholics who feel upset about what is happening, they look at this and they, you can find evidence for thinking, well, it's Protestants who are behind it.
Yeah.
And I think what gives that, what kind of really puts rocket fuel in that fear is the fact that there are clearly two massive echoes of the Reformation that Catholics find quite hard to miss. So the attack on the Catholic Church again and again is cast as an attack on superstition.
Very Thomas Cromwell.
So the attacks on privilege are often very stridently anti-clerical. And just as in the Reformation, so now the end of censorship means that pamphlets and illustrations can flood everywhere. And you don't even need to be able to read to understand kind of anti-clerical, anti-religious pamphlets. It's immediately apparent. And anyone with any familiarity with the Reformation would, of course, immediately see the parallels. And just as Luther had kind of staged mocking ceremonies that symbolically, cast contempt on the papacy, the same thing is happening in the revolution. The church and the aristocracy are both objects of kind of staged, managed processions that make them out to be kind of completely ridiculous. You get parodies of the mass, you get plays that are very anti-clerical get put on in the Paris theatres, sponsored by enthusiasts for the for the revolution. And undoubtedly, lots of people are swayed by this. They find it very exciting, the way in which suddenly they're being allowed to think in ways that they previously had never thought to think. But there are others who find it deeply unsettling. So that's on the ideological level. But of course, the Reformation isn't just about ideology. It's also about
money,
hard cash and property.
Yeah.
And there is an attack that kind of builds up from the abolition of the church's tithes through the months and years that follow, that is actually pretty Henry VIII. Because we've said the revolution hasn't really improved the fiscal crisis that had done so much to bring it about. France is still basically bankrupt. There's no money. So how to plug the gap? And, that's exactly the question that prompted Henry VIII to end up dissolving the monasteries. And it's the solution that, the more radical elements in the National Assembly kind of start thinking, maybe we could do this, because the church owes something
so much.
Yeah, I mean, they own something like 10% of the nation's wealth. Who's the guy who basically proposes this?
Talleyrand.
It's Talleyrand,
the Bishop of Autun. But I mean, that bishopric is kind of slightly nominal, isn't it? Let's be honest.
Slightly. So he does this on the 10th of October. So that's a few months after the abolition of tithes. And I think, actually, to be fair to Talleyrand, it's not just a kind of cynical proposal, because he's saying, we can take all this land and it can, lots of the money can go towards helping the nation's finances, but we could also basically nationalize the church, and we could use the money from all these properties to give all the people in the church a kind of flat fee, a flat income.
Yeah.
And this isn't Joseph II, the emperor, the Habsburg emperor, the brother of Marie Antoinette, had come up with a very similar kind of wheeze, and that basically had gone through. So there are elements within the church you think, yeah, fine, fair enough. And obviously the radical elements, so Mirabeau and all his pals, they think it's a brilliant idea. And they take it to the National Assembly. The vast majority of people in the National Assembly aren't clergy, so they think it's brilliant as well. And the proposal is voted through. But it has to be said that for obvious reasons, most of the clergy really, really hate it, because the implication is that they will now be kind of moral functionaries, state employees. And this isn't the sense they have of their own vocation at all.
And isn't this interesting that when we were talking about the Estates General, which becomes the National Assembly, we were saying that, some of the big drivers of reform are the parish priests, who are the poorest people there, who are the closest to ordinary Frenchmen, who are often seized with a real idealism.
Because they're the first to join the States General, aren't they? It's a few poor parish priests.
Yeah, they're to go and join the Third Estate and become the National Assembly. But within months, a wedge is being driven between the revolution and probably the majority of ordinary priests. Even those who end up signing up to it are very, very conflicted about it.
I think there are the poorest priests are the ones likeliest to side with this, because they stand to benefit. But obviously there are any priest with a relatively higher income is going to have to take a pay cut, and the people who are really in the crosshairs are the monks and the nuns, just as they were in Henry VIII's Reformation, because first they've been deprived of their income, and now they're deprived of their lands. And the corollary of this is exactly as in Henry VIII's time. So on the 13th of February, all monasteries and convents, except those who are kind of devoted to charitable work, are officially dissolved, and it's forbidden people to start taking monastic vows or vows, conventual vows.
And how much is there in France the same prejudice, the same preconception that monks and nuns are incredibly fat and corrupt and sexually depraved? That classic kind of Protestant image.
I think much greater. Because I don't think that was the case in Reformation England, but it's definitely the case in 18th century France, that monks and nuns have been absolute staples of these kind of pornographic tracts that we've been talking about quite a lot, not because we're prurient, but because they condition how people see the establishment in quite a fundamental way. And there is a feeling among enthusiasts for the Enlightenment that there is they are useless.
Yeah.
They contribute nothing to society. They need to be turned into useful citizens. And so March and April 1790, you get all these kind of bands of patriots with their cockades and their revolutionary sashes turning up and going full Thomas Cromwell, kind of chucking the monks and the nuns out. So you can see why by the summer of 1790, I think that there is a kind of increasing sense of alienation in the church from the revolution. This is not what the Abbé de Sieyes thought that he was encouraging when he first proposed dissolving the three estates into a single national assembly.
Yeah.
In Talleyrand's own see of Autun, you start getting letters from his flock kind of saying he's an absolute traitor, he's a Judas. What is he up to? But it's not just in Autun, it's across the whole of France. You get priests who, they don't want to dissolve their sense of themselves as belonging to God's church and to just become the equivalent of kind of magistrates or officers in the army.
Yeah, civil servants.
The whole point of being a priest is that their primary loyalty is not to the patrie, not to the nation. It is to God.
There you have that tension, the universalism and the nationalism, yet again.
But talking of universalism, I mean, Catholicos means universal, and the head of the universal church is the Pope. So that is the head of the church, not the National Assembly. And the Pope is saying, basically, I'm not going to put up with this kind of revolutionary stuff.
Yeah.
So he, in secret, the Pope in Rome, Pius VI, he starts to condemn the Declaration of the Rights of Man and all the policies that are being pursued in France on kind of relations to the church. And this obviously sets up a kind of massive tension within the church and by extension within the vast mass of the French people. Not least because the National Assembly, rather than trying to arrive at an accommodation with the papacy and with the church, just doubles down. They're not in a mood to negotiate with superstition and absolutism. They're not going to allow privilege to flourish. And so they feel we need to find a supply of committed citizen priests. The church as it stands is not doing that. So we need to push things forward. And their solution in July 1790 is to draw up what they call the civil constitution of the clergy. And by the tenets of this, priests and bishops are to be elected. And of course, the electorate by this point would include Protestants.
Yeah.
It would include Jews. It would include self-professed atheists. And they will effectively, it's like electing a JP or something. And once they have been elected, everyone who is going to take up his position, as a kind of state priest, citizen priest, will be obliged to swear an oath of loyalty to the nation and to its laws. And I think that to most people in the National Assembly, this doesn't seem a big deal at all. It's a kind of, it's a process of legislative tidying up. But to lots of priests, it's a source of complete agony because they have now been put in the position that lots of them had been struggling to avoid, where they have to choose between swearing this oath, the oath to the revolution, or staying true to the authority of the Pope, of the Church, of God.
It's massive moments, isn't it?
It's a really, really invidious choice. And, just as the Declaration of the Rights of Man tends not to have perhaps the resonance in English-speaking countries that it certainly does in France. So likewise, the civil constitution of the clergy, I think if you said, what's the key moment in the French Revolution, I certainly wouldn't have said this.
No.
But it's amazing when you read histories of the revolution, English histories of the revolution. Again and again, historians point to this as being the key moment that fractures the revolution, fractures any sense of kind of national harmony. So this is Simon Schama. The civil constitution was not simply another piece of institutional legislation. It was the beginning of a holy war. William Doyle in the Oxford History of the French Revolution. The French Revolution had many turning points, but the oath of the clergy was unquestionably one of them, if not the greatest. And Peter McPhee, in his brilliant Liberty or Death book on the French Revolution, the oath fractured both the church and the revolution.
Yeah, I remember doing this at A-level, Tom, and the civil constitution of the clergy I regarded as incredibly boring and dry, and everybody kind of skipped it because we couldn't wait to get onto the terror. But I think you're quite right to emphasize it, because this does feel like the moment when what has been kind of one process carrying a lot of people along with it, when it really divides and it becomes, I mean, that tension has always been there, and that sense of an incipient kind of division between us and them, between the people who are on the side of the patrie or the nation and those people who are traitors or conspirators. But this is the moment that drives a lot of people who might otherwise have gone along with the revolution against it, because they are being asked to rip up everything they held, not just dear, but everything they held sacred. And a lot of people just will not do that.
And I think there are the faintest echoes of the Brexit referendum for us in Britain.
Right.
Because effectively it comes to serve as a referendum, because priests obviously pay attention to what their flock think. Mm-hmm. And the division is quite kind of Brexit-like. So 54% of priests end up taking the oath, which means that 46 don't.
Yeah. And
there are very clear geographical divisions. So in Paris, the oath taking is very high in the regions around Paris. In Provence, it's very high. But in the countryside, and particularly in the West, it's essentially you have what has now emerged as a counter-revolutionary bloc. And you have people who are defining themselves as citizens, and you have people who are defining themselves as Christians, as communities of souls.
Yeah.
And both sides come to increasingly cast the other side in the darkest possible light. So enthusiasts for revolution see their opponents as people who are clinging on to superstition and all kind of privilege and all kinds of things like that. Whereas enthusiasts for priests who've taken the oath see the revolutionaries as, bloodthirsty fanatics who are destroying everything that has made their life precious. And it's the moment where you get counter-revolution as the kind of the opposite to revolution, which up until that point I think you hadn't had. And it poses the question of, could it have been different? I mean, might the revolution have been able to take the vast mass of Catholic citizens with them? And there's a kind of, I know of no better kind of teaser for that question than a famous painting, it was done in 1789 in the wake of the drawing of the Declaration of the Rights of Man by a painter called Jean-Jacques François Le Barbier, who had actually been a court painter to Louis XVI. And in the wake of the signing of the Declaration, he is employed to give it a visual representation. So he gives all the kind of the favorite symbols. So there's, broken chains, and there's a liberty cap, and there's great Masonic eye gazing down. But the thing that's striking about the portrayal of the Declaration itself is that it is written as though it is carved onto stone tablets.
Yeah.
And the stone tablets, of course, are an echo of the tablets that were given to Moses on Mount Sinai, which is the kind of the definitive expression of divine revelation, not of human law.
And of course, a prefiguring, Tom, an important and interesting prefiguring of Ed Miliband's stone tablets in 2015.
Yeah, so the echoes of the French Revolution reverberate everywhere. When Le Barbier is doing that, what is he doing? Is he saying it's possible to synthesize the Bible and the Enlightenment?
Yeah.
You don't need to choose between them. The two can merge. And if that's what he's saying, I mean, it's not completely mad, because actually it's very clear when you look at the Enlightenment that a lot of the values that the Enlightenment assumes are universal, that everyone would accept, are actually bred from deeply Christian assumptions. I mean, people who've listened to this podcast regularly will be aware.
Have I ever heard you use that phrase before? You should have a Tom Holland generator where you just press a button and it says bred of deeply Christian assumptions.
But just to give an example, so Voltaire,
go on.
His horror at the fate of Jean Calin, why is he so upset by this? Why is he upset by the torture to death of an innocent man on an instrument of torture? It clearly reflects kind of deep psychological response to the figure of Christ that Voltaire would have absorbed as a child, I think.
Maybe, or maybe he just doesn't like people being broken on the wheel by torture. I mean, is that not possible?
But there you're assuming that that's something instinctively that people react against. I mean, I think the evidence suggests contrary-wise. I think people, plenty of societies have been perfectly happy with that. And Calas himself on the wheel, I should add, kind of makes this parallel explicit. I die innocent, I do not pity myself. Jesus Christ, who was innocent, died for me by even more cruel torments. Mm-hmm. And I think what kind of brings this home is the fact that Calas is exonerated by the French king, who the anointed king, Louis XV. And he's exonerated not because Louis XV has become an Enlightenment philosophe, and not because the vast mass of people in France who feel sympathy for Calas have become Enlightenment philosophes and in sympathy with Voltaire's skepticism, but because they see Voltaire's campaign as being entirely concordant with Christian principles. So just to quote David Bien, who wrote a brilliant book on the Calas affair, the view that the impact of the Enlightenment polarized French thought, creating two large mutually suspicious groups, one clerical and the other anti-clerical, is to read back the developments of the revolution, where it definitely does happen, into a period when they simply were not present. And, we talked about the role that priests play in the early weeks and months of the revolution. And at the Bastille, this storming of a place dank with chains, if the stories are to be believed, and the funerals that are given for those who had taken part in the storming of the Bastille, the text that is preached by the Archbishop of Paris comes from Paul. You, my brothers, were called to be free. And this is a sentiment that is perfectly in tune with the call to liberté in the revolution.
So, Tom, are you effectively saying, and some people, listeners may consider this the classic Holland gambit, that the ideological struggle within the French Revolution of revolutionaries against counter-revolutionaries is basically a struggle between two different kinds of Christians?
I am basically saying that, and it's about the attempt, I think, of the revolution to appropriate much of its inheritance from the Christian past. And I think that's the other way of interpreting Le Berbier's picture, is that it's not in any way saying that that the Bible and the Enlightenment, Christ and Voltaire, can be synthesized. It's saying that a revolutionary order has to appropriate what it can of previous revolutionary orders.
Yeah.
And the truth is that there is something distinctive, I think, about European society in the West that reaches right the way back beyond the Reformation, back to the 11th century, when Europe's primal revolution happens, where you have basically, it's the Catholic Church that is directing it. You have a pope who humbles kings. The humbling of kings is a vital part of the dynamics of what is going on in the 11th century. You have an emperor kneeling in the snow before a pope. You have a notion that society itself can be born again, can be bred anew, can be washed in blood and emerge as something new. And it creates a kind of division within society that by the time of the revolution has been framed as being religious and secular.
Yeah.
And of course, the Catholic Church is the universal church. So that instinct on the part of the revolutionaries to preach universalism is a deeply Christian one. And finally, just on the declaration that we began with, the Declaration of Human Rights, where did the idea of human rights come from? Then if they're universal, they are not evident in antiquity. They are not evident in parts of the world beyond Latin Christendom. They emerge in the 12th century as a product of the cultural ferment of that first revolution in Italy in the 12th century. And that's where they come from. So if the revolution is to proclaim that these are universal and that the revolution embodies them, it needs to utterly incinerate and obliterate the memory of that. I think that what the revolution demonstrates is actually the one thing a revolutionary hates more than a reactionary is a rival revolutionary. And I think the hostility between the revolution as it will emerge over the course of the period that we've been talking about, so into the period of the terror, is that the hostility of the revolution towards the Catholic Church is similar it's similar to the hostility that the Protestant reformers felt towards the papacy.
It's kind of a rival church.
It's a rival. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Interesting. The Holland Gambit, and never more brilliantly deployed, Tom, than just now.
Very kind.
So all of that lies ahead, because we will get to the terror and the sort of civil war within the revolution. But obviously, right from the start, to go back to the Declaration of Human Rights, that was what, August 1789?
Yep.
And right from that point, Louis and Marie Antoinette and the people who have not fled, who are still around them, they don't like this kind of stuff at all, do they?
Of course not, because it has implications for the monarchy as well as the church.
So Louis published a response to the declaration in September, and he kind of said, yeah, I love the spirit of it. Great. And then he went through all the specifics and said, don't agree with that.
Yeah, so like the Serbian reply to the Austrian ultimatum.
Very good. Yes, very good. And I think, for me, the obvious problem that they have with their constitution building and their desire to set France on a new sort of even keel is that they have a huge hole at the centre of their constitution, which is the king, because they've been talking about a British style constitutional monarchy.
They have, yeah.
But is Louis going to play that part? I mean, is he ever psychologically ready? And particularly once the church, which he has sworn an oath to uphold, once that comes into the kind of firing line, I don't think he's ever. You were saying, is there ever a way this can all be reconciled? I don't think he's ever going to adjust himself to this new world. And obviously, we're going to get back to the narrative, because in just a few weeks after that, after his response to the declaration, that tension will reach a climax, won't it? With one of the most dramatic, exciting, tragic episodes of the entire revolution. And that's what we're doing tomorrow, Tom.
It is. It's the women's march on Versailles.
Oh, very exciting. I can't.
So we'll be looking at that, and we'll be looking the way in which the revolution has to work out what it's going to do about the monarchy. So we will be back with that tomorrow. Adama.
Stuff. Au revoir.